you ever been made redundant? Or made anyone redundant? Yeah, so you may be surprised to hear that I consider myself quite fortunate that I was made redundant from my first job. To be honest, it was voluntary redundancy, so I chose to leave. It was from Procter & Gamble, my first graduate job. Now, 24 years ago, I was a bit different. I wasn't the composed, measured individual you see before you. The polite description of me was probably confident and self-assured. The more accurate description was probably cocky and arrogant. Life was a bit different in the 90s, and I'd had it easy. I'd got a great degree from university, I had my pick of graduate jobs from blue chip companies, and I took a job in product research from Procter & Gamble. So when, 4.5 years later, I decided I was more interested in people than washing powders, I fully expected that I would just be able to move into HR as I wanted. And in many ways I was lucky, because P&G thought I was talented and they wanted to keep me. So they offered me that opportunity. But only if I moved to Egham. And I didn't want to do that. I had a new boyfriend in Newcastle, so I chose to leave. And because P&G was an excellent company, they gave me outplacement support. And that was incredibly valuable. 4 months later, I started my new job as a training manager, and the rest is history. But it struck me then, and has struck me ever since, that it was quite sad that I got all that help and support after I'd decided to leave the company, rather than to help me before and help me make a decision that might have kept me in the company. So that's been my kind of mission ever since. It's actually how can we help create environments, create cultures, give help and support that will help people manage and develop their careers in organisations. And for us today, our conversation is about how you do that in a way that can attract and retain female talent. And so we're going to look at a few things. In the next 40 minutes, I want to talk you through and for you to get a feel for 5 fundamental factors that you need to have in place if you're going to create a culture that's going to attract and retain female talent. And I'm going to give you a model that you can use so you can assess your own culture, determine what's working, what needs to change, and what the priorities might need to be. So we're going to cover the foundation for changing your culture. We're going to look at the different roles of leaders, managers, and employees, and we're going to look at the implications for the organisation and for you as HR professionals. So let's start by looking at the foundation for changing your culture. And this is something we've already talked about a lot today. But the key thing is, if you really value diversity, then make diversity one of your values. And we've talked about values, and we've talked about the fact that actually the real danger isn't just about making it one of your values, but the fact that by being a value, there's a danger that that is lip service. So that's not enough. It has to be a real value that is lived and embedded in the organisation. And Mary mentioned Accenture earlier and showed their video. That's what Accenture does. Right, this is their homepage. Right on the homepage is their clear belief that when she rises, we all rise. And if you explore further their section on inclusion and diversity, you see that statement that we put inclusion and diversity at the very heart of the way we work, think, and run our business. And it's that final bit that's really important, the way we run our business. Are we actually taking the actions that bring this value to life? Now, I used to work for Accenture. I don't anymore. Only people that work there will be able to tell you whether this is really lived and breathed in the organisation. The fact that it was number 3 on the list of places for women to work in 2017, as voted by women, I think, hopefully suggests that they are actually putting their actions and behaviours where their portrayal is. And that's quite different to a company that a friend of mine worked for. So this company, Helen, I think it was mentioned earlier, recruitment can be quite a male or macho environment. This company is a recruitment company. They specialise in recruiting for the technology industry. And my friend was asked to join as Chief People Officer. And they said that one of the things they wanted to do was change their culture, because by their own admission, they were like Wolf of Wall Street. Now this is last year. This isn't the 80s or 90s or noughties even. This is just last year. And I did some work with them briefly, and I heard stories of romantic liaisons in the coat cupboards, a hard partying culture, intimidating behaviour. And if you look at their website, which I'm not going to show you to protect the guilty, you will see the language that is used in that is actually supportive of this kind of culture. So we've talked about the language on websites and job ads, and the language on their website is work hard, play hard, competitive, quite macho, quite ruthless in its wording. And that's the culture that's being created. Now, it turns out that their stated intent of wanting to change this culture maybe wasn't as real in terms of their willingness to change their behaviours and actions and decisions as would be needed. 6 months after joining, my friend said, "You may not be surprised to hear I have left." I was like, okay. And when I had a conversation with her about it, she said, "I just sat in too many board meetings when I kind of flagged up, hold on a minute, how is this consistent with where we want to go?" and didn't get anywhere. And my friend is a fearless female. And she said to me, "Antoinette, I have 2 daughters. I could not look them in the eye and stay in that environment." So if you're going to create a culture that is going to attract and retain female talent, values has to be at the heart of it, but they have to be embedded values. They can't just be lip service. They can't just be aspirational. They have to be used as a compass that drives action, behaviour and decision making. And that means, as everyone has said today, this can't just be an HR thing. This has to be a leadership decision, not just in words, but in actions. So, my question to you is, thinking about your own organisation, is diversity and inclusion reflected in your company values? And is it lived and breathed and used as a compass for decision making, action, behaviour? And are people held to account for that? So if they're not behaving and acting in line with those values, does somebody call them up on it? Well, someone said, no, that isn't acceptable. Because it's not just the CEO's responsibility, it's not just HR's responsibility. Diversity and inclusion is everyone's responsibility. And if it's going to become part of the culture, then it has to have everybody buying into it and operating according to it. So that brings me to the different roles of leaders, managers and employees. And I think of this as the power of 3. You need these 3 things happening in partnership in order to create culture change. And it's a bit like a three-legged stool. If any one of them is weak or missing, the whole thing falls over. So you can't just work on one of them, you have to work on all of them. And they are, you need strategic leaders, you need managers as mentors, and you need empowered employees. So strategic leaders, what does that mean? Well, it means that if you're going to attract and retain female talent, you either already need a diverse workforce and inclusive culture, or you need a really strong vision that paints a picture of what that looks like that people can buy into and believe in. And that needs to be inspiring, it needs to be compelling, it needs to be communicated and reinforced at every opportunity. And again, just using Accenture as an example, part of their vision, they're not at equal yet. So they're not there yet, however much they might be on the radar. But their vision is getting to equal. And that's a campaign that they have going. And that campaign allows two things to happen. Firstly, it makes it really clear to everybody that this is a priority for the company. And secondly, it gives them a barometer by which they can have discussions at department level, at team level, at functional level. Well, what are we doing to get to equal? Does this get us to equal? Will this help get us to equal? And so it's something easy to remember, but something always reinforced in the messaging, so that everyone can buy into it and contribute towards it. Now we've talked about, a lady made a point earlier about the fact it's not all about the women. It's not about women having to be different and fixing women. Everyone has a responsibility, and your employees don't care about your organisation. They care about their careers. Or rather, that's a provocative statement. Maybe I should say employees don't care about your organisation as much as their careers. So you need to help them manage and develop their careers in the way they want. Otherwise, they're either going to physically quit and leave, or they're going to psychologically quit and stay. And neither of those are good things. So it is an individual's responsibility to manage and develop their career. But they can't do it alone if you want them to develop their career in your organisation. They need support from the organisation to do that. And we find, when we work on our Stepping Up coaching programme, there are 5 things that get in the way of any leader managing their career, actually, and therefore 5 things that we help them work through. Now, this framework is the same for women and men. What's different is the focus and priority and content that goes behind each frame. And so the starting point is the kind of personal stuff. This is about the purpose. Who am I? What do I want out of my life and my career? Do I want to be CEO? Do I want to be a teacher? Do I want to be a stay-at-home mum? Do I want to be head of department? Do I want to do something completely different and just go travelling? What do I want from my career that actually is true to me and maybe gets past some of those external pressures that are on us from our families, from the media, from our organisations, from our friends, from everybody else that has influenced our lives. What do I have to bring to the party? What's unique about me? And what contribution do I want to make in the world? So a real level of self-awareness. Then, as Scott was talking earlier, actually, how do I get the best out of my people so that I can look up and out and operate more strategically and not keep getting dragged down into the operation, rescuing everything that's going on. So how do I develop the coaching skills necessary to get the best out of my people and help them develop their careers? And how do I develop the confidence and skills to manage performance and have some of those courageous conversations that need to happen in order to deliver? But in terms of being successful, it's not all about managing my people and delivering through them. It's also about my collaborative relationships, so my partnerships. Who do I need to influence and work with? Maybe who are in, my peers in a management team, or maybe they're external parties and third parties that I need to collaborate with, and how do I influence them when I have no authority? And then finally, presence. How do I adapt how do I adopt the right communication strategies for raising my visibility and establishing a presence amongst those people who matter and those people who make decisions? And really think about that. So as I say, it doesn't matter who we coach, whether they're a man or a woman, all of that is relevant. But what is different, as Scott has mentioned, is where the different priorities lie and how, for men and women, the different things that come up in each of these buckets can be a bit different. And once you've got employees who are empowered to take ownership of managing and developing their careers, then they need mentors. We've all talked about it. Mentoring has come up a lot today. But actually, there is a view that mentoring can be done by anybody, sometimes. And mentoring is a skill. And if you are going to have mentors who empower your employees to take ownership and for their development, they need to be very skilled in having those conversations rather than just telling them what to do. Given that if they tell them what to do, they're not thinking about it through their eyes and their lens, they're thinking about it through their own. And you, like myself, might have had various mentors that have been, what you need to do is, you need to move to that, you need to move into tech, you need to get a job here, you need to do that. And actually, some of that might be thought-provoking and helpful, but they're saying that because that's what worked for them. And that means it's useful data, because it's useful experience, but it's data. And actually, mentors need the skill to be able to present that know-how, that wisdom, that experience as options for the individual to think about, not necessarily direction and instruction for them to slavishly follow. Because their world will be different. And there's also the thought of, we've talked about role models, but we've also talked about the fact that there actually aren't enough senior female role models. So at the moment, while we might love to have all our female employees mentored by senior female leaders, that ratio is not going to happen. So there's a great phrase which I love, you can't be what you can't see. And that's great because we do need those role models. But we also need mentors who can help people be what they can't see yet, but they might be able to visualize. And to be able to help them navigate an organization, because the mentor is one of the people that represents the type of individual that needs to be influenced, even if they aren't the type of person that the employee wants to become. So mentoring is a huge tool, strategy, area of importance. But there needs to be some consideration as to how you're going to make that work. Yeah. And is it a formal program? Is it an informal program? Is it by individuals, or is it through networks? As we've heard about, whether those be community networks, networks of interest, networks, employee networks, colleague networks, or networks that come about because everyone's been through a similar training program. All of those are resources to mentoring. And there's some great data that says it's worth doing. 77% of companies that employ mentoring, and this is formal mentoring, this is even without informal mentoring, report it as effective for retaining and developing employees. And 62% of employees are likely to stay with a company after they've received mentoring. As I say, this is just stats with formal mentoring. If you throw informal mentoring into the mix, then it's probably even more powerful. So I guess my questions for you are, in terms of your leaders, are they operating strategically? Do they have a clear vision of a diverse workforce that they are communicating and inspiring others to buy into and taking the action necessary? Are you, in terms of your employees, are you doing everything you can to get your female talent ready to take on greater positions, to empower them to develop their careers? And do they have access to mentors, whether that be formally, because you've got a mentoring program, or informally, because it's just part of the way the business works, or through groups, because of training programs and employee networks. So we've talked about the foundations, we've talked about the roles of leaders, managers and employees. What about the implications for the organisation? And by this I mean the policies and processes that go behind that. The reason culture change is hard is because it's behaviour change. The culture of an organisation is the totality of the behaviours of individuals within it. The culture is not, policies and processes or what's on a piece of paper. However, those things will either enable the behaviours you want, or they'll get in the way. So, yes, I encourage you to think about, well, what's getting in the way? If we know what behaviours we want people to adopt, and we know the culture we want to achieve and the vision we're trying to get to, what's getting in the way of that? And we've had some great examples of that. We've been talking about selection processes, and maybe what gets in the way is the interview panel not being representative of actually the proportions that you want in the workforce, or that CVs with names on, that gets in the way. So we've already had some great examples of how can we adapt these processes, policies and practices so that they enable and reinforce what we're trying to achieve rather than acting as barriers. And there's three different areas that generally can enable or get in the way. So the HR processes and policies. So, obviously there's things like flexible working, there's parental leave, there's equal pay. But there's also the relation between those. When we're talking about Accenture earlier, and the fact that they brought in shared parental leave, great. But what they also realised was that if they're going to bring that in and that's going to work, they also needed to look at their performance model and their performance review. Because otherwise, the way the performance review worked would mean that the parental leave policy didn't work. Because if people were going to get penalised for taking parental leave, they wouldn't take it. So you need to look at how all of these link together. Organisational structure can get in the way. So we talked earlier about being creative, about designing roles. How can we actually design roles to achieve what we want to do, rather than sticking with the building blocks that we've already got. And then values and behaviours, obviously, we talked about already. And as you start, so my question, I guess, is think about, you've got loads of ideas now from what we've talked about today about what you want to change, what you want to move forward. What might be getting in the way? And talk to those people that you want to attract and retain. What's helping? So if you've got female talent joining your organisation, what worked? What attracted you? Great, let's do more of that. And actually, let's make sure if that's what attracted you, that is consistent with your experience in the organisation. If you've got female employees staying with you, great, what's working? Let's make sure we do more of that. But equally, if they're leaving, what's not working? What's getting in the way that maybe you can address? And if you're looking at changing your processes, there will be critics, because change is hard. And so I recommend, and that's okay. Critics is a good thing. What I recommend is you use critics as designers. And this is a technique I got from this book, Find Your Light Bulb by Mike Harris. Now, Mike Harris was the CEO of First Direct and Egg. So the first telephone bank, the first internet bank. And what he says in his book, which I thought was fascinating, was his mother was the greatest critic of the first telephone bank. And she gave him a whole catalogue of reasons why this venture wasn't going to work. People hate using the telephone. They hate hanging on. They hate the fact they get passed from one person to another. They hate the fact that when they're passed from one person to another, they've got to repeat the same information over and over. They hate the fact that they're put on hold. Just gave this whole list of reasons why this new baby he was about to launch wasn't going to work. Thanks, Mom. But what he did was he took all those criticisms and he turned them into statements of intent. He said, okay, if people hate holding on, waiting for the phone to be answered, one of the design elements is the phone will be answered after 3 rings. If one of the things people hate is repeating their information every time they get passed from one to another, we will make sure they never have to repeat the information. The information will follow them from call to call. So he turned all of these objections and criticisms into criteria for the design. And so that's something that I now use with my clients when we're looking at redesigning processes. It's actually, in HR, we get a lot of flack and criticism and objections and scepticism. Well, okay, let's see if we can use them. Let's see if we can design them into the process or consider them when we're redesigning. So, co-design your processes with your critics. So, pulling it all together before the alarm. We talked about 5 fundamental factors. At the heart of it is your values, but not just values on paper. Values embedded into the behaviours of everyone in the organisation and really brought to life in action and decision making. We talked about strategic leaders. So strategic leaders are really going to take ownership for making this part of their vision, inspiring others behind it and driving it forward in terms of communication and inspiration and holding people to account. Empowering your employees, giving them the support they need in order to manage and develop their careers within your organisation. And then helping managers develop the skills to be those mentors that can provide that support, whether that be on an informal basis or a formal basis. And then finally, making sure that all of that is supported by your policies and processes and practices so that the organisation is seen as trustworthy and doing what it says it's going to do rather than the actual systems getting in the way of that. Now, in your goodie bags, you have a little heat map that allows you to think about some of these things. So you've got that model, that growth culture, and there's some little questions for you to think about. They're about growth in general rather than specifically gender equality, but you can read them either generally for growth or with a diversity and inclusion lens. You've got some little traffic light stickers, so you can mark them. Is it green? Are we good to go? Yeah, we're fine on this. Are we amber? Well, we're getting ready, but we're not quite off the starting block yet. Or are you red on that? Are you stalled on that particular dimension? This is the kind of thing I work with my clients on, and if you'd like to explore it further, we hold boardroom sessions where we go through that with them, and then if they have got loads of things to work on, we have think through and share our insights on how they might do that. So you're very welcome to one of those as an application form in your goodie bag as well. And that means it's now time. Jamie is poised with a microphone, so we're ready for any questions.
Antoinette, thank you very much. Certainly something that you said that resonated with me was around painting that vision. So number one, does the leader have a vision? But it's then the ability to paint the picture and inspire everybody else behind that vision. And the best leaders I know are able to do that. So yeah, certainly resonated. Thank you. Okay, what questions do you have for Antoinette? We've got time for one, perhaps two questions.
Hi, Antoinette. It's Marina again. Thank you for your presentation and sharing your insight. I was quite fascinated by the framework with the 4 or 5 Ps, and you said that it's different between men and women. Which categories there is a more of a disparity in the answer or how women and men approach it in one way?
So I think in terms of the personal central bit, the purpose, I think there are different pressures on men and women. So we've already heard, there might be pressures on women to feel that they have to be a primary caregiver, whether that be to children or actually aging parents. That's another thing that's coming into our world. Men might be under greater pressure to bring home the bacon and to be the major breadwinner, because we've been brought up by a different generation who have different values to us, and those family pressures and expectations don't go away. And so that might still be hanging around. So there's that element of it, and there's also the presence element. The how do I create my visibility? So that great story that we heard earlier about when somebody got in the American Express, the country manager, and all the men got in touch and all the women didn't. So there's an inclination that women are more likely to go, well, if I just work hard, I'll get recognised and rewarded. Whereas men are more likely to push themselves forward. And for any coaches in the room, there's a very famous book by Marshall Goldsmith called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And what's interesting is that he recently realised that what he recommended in that book, which was about progression and development, didn't necessarily work equally for both genders. So he's now collaborated on another book called, I think it's called How Women Rise, by Shelley or Shirley, I can't remember her name. But anyway, with a female author that helps kind of take that adaptation. Is that answer?
Great, thank you. We've got time for one more quick question if there are any. Antoinette, thank you so much.